Oh, hello there. I'm Abby Sharp. Welcome to a special edition of Abby's Kitchen called Toilet Talk, where I uncover your deepest, darkest, poopiest questions and set the record straight. Now, our question from today comes from Georgina. Dear Abby, I notice I've got some serious gas and bloating every time I eat all my favorite carb-loaded foods. My girlfriends say I must be gluten intolerant, but I read on Facebook that that's BS. Is gluten intolerance a real condition, or is it all in my head? Signed, Gluten Confused Georgina. Okay, Georgina, let me break it down for you because this is a sensitive topic. So gluten intolerance, or non-celiac gluten sensitivity, is defined as the presence of gastrointestinal IBS-like symptoms in the absence of celiac disease that seems to improve on a gluten-free diet. So the only way to test for gluten intolerance is to rule out celiac disease and a wheat allergy and to do a food elimination test. So it's basically a diagnosis of exclusion. So this, of course, has led a lot of researchers out there to question the legitimacy of gluten intolerance. So let's take a look at what some of the research tells us. So some very early biomarker studies were able to identify some abnormalities in the antibody levels of people who self-identified as being gluten intolerant. And this hinted towards some kind of sort of systemic immune activation that was different from people who have celiac disease. This has sparked a whole bunch of dietary challenge studies. So in the early studies, it was found that when people were put on a gluten-free diet when they self-identified as having gluten intolerance, in some cases, they started to feel a little bit better. The problem with some of these early studies is that other components of wheat-based products, like FODMAPs, for example, which we've talked about in depth in this video right here, were not isolated or accounted for. Also, a lot of the participants didn't exactly have celiac disease ruled out. They may have had the biopsy done at some point, but a lot of them were already on a gluten-free diet, which can interfere with the test result. Subsequent research by a leading research team in this field was able to better isolate things like FODMAPs away from gluten. Their first small study found that those who had gluten intolerance, who were given a small amount of gluten, reported slightly more gastrointestinal symptoms than those who were not given gluten. However, not everyone who had gluten intolerance reported symptoms on gluten. In their follow-up trial, they not only removed FODMAPs from the equation, but they also removed things like dairy and food chemicals as well. And only 2 people had any kind of symptoms related to gluten. In other words, they weren't able to find a strong cause and effect relationship between the consumption of gluten and digestive issues in people who did not have celiac disease. So why do you feel better when you go gluten-free? Well, there may be some factors at play here. First of all, you're probably going to be cutting out a lot of overly processed foods. When you cut back on gluten, you're also simultaneously usually cutting back on things like additives, sugars, and saturated fats. I mean, if you suddenly stopped eating muffins and donuts all day for breakfast, you're probably gonna feel better. But if you were to swap out your regular donut breakfast for, an all-day gluten-free donut bender, are you gonna feel any better? Some of you, maybe a little bit, but for the most of you guys out there, probably not so much. Next, let's talk about FODMAPs. So again, you can watch an entire video about FODMAPs right here, but to recap, this stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. And basically they're just carbs that are found in a lot of different kinds of grain products. Research suggests that they may cause some digestive issues for some people, so they may actually be the more likely culprit. And lastly, maybe it's a wheat allergy. While yes, most wheat products would be cut out and eliminated on a gluten-free diet, however, knowing that you had a wheat allergy rather than gluten intolerance would allow you to enjoy so many more amazingly delicious, nourishing foods. Things like oats, spelt, and barley. So why not just play it safe and cut out gluten altogether if it makes you feel better? Well, if the placebo or nocebo effect is at play, you could be doing more harm than good for your health. How? I'll tell you why. So first of all, you may be missing out on some key nutrients. Grains are fantastic sources of fibers, antioxidants, and B vitamins. Without proper counseling or even a legit reason, you may be missing out on some of these benefits. Number 2, gluten-free foods may actually be worse for you. Gluten-free breads and pastries are not necessarily any more healthy than their gluten-filled counterparts. In fact, oftentimes they've got less fiber, less protein, fewer beneficial nutrients, and more sugar, salt, and fat in there to make up for what's being taken out. If you're choosing gluten-free foods to lose weight, you definitely want to actually compare the labels of products to choose the food that best fits your goals. Finally, shifts to gut bacteria. So grains are one of the best sources of the beneficial prebiotic fibers. So eliminating grains and those fibers may cause some shifts in your gut microflora, which may increase the risk of chronic disease. So bottom line, the jury is still out whether or not gluten sensitivity is a real thing. Personally, I think we need way larger studies with larger sample sizes in order to make a definitive statement on this. However, from my perspective as a dietitian, my opinion is that yes, there probably is such thing as gluten intolerance. It may actually be a whole class of different conditions. I also think that likely a lot of the relief that some people get from going gluten-free is actually associated with other non-gluten components of these kinds of foods. So if you are thinking that maybe you have a sensitivity to gluten or anything else in food, always speak to your doctor or a registered dietitian first to get a proper diagnosis before you go changing your diet. And guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give it the thumbs up. Leave me a comment below with some of your burning toilet talk questions. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time on Abby's Kitchen. Bye!